Hello and welcome to another edition of the Taco Society Presents. We have another great show for you tonight. We were at Necon, which is a New England Writers Conference held in Bristol, Rhode Island, where Matt Bechtel and Sarah Booth put on one heck of a show. These writers and fans get together and we have panels on the art of horror and films and just about everything else you can associate with the genre. And we get a chance to sit around and talk to each other, learn a few things, and have a lot of lively discussions. Some friends of the show were there: Chris Golden, Bracken McLeod, Scott Godsworth, Jim Moore, as well as other authors you may have heard of: Jeff Strand, Charles Rutledge, Dan Foley, David Price, and there's way too many more to mention. The filming we did at Necon was of the Guest of Honor panel. And I'm going to name the guests of honors, and I'm not going to go into what they do because they're going to do that during the introduction to the program, but I think you'll recognize at least one of the names. Mark Morris, Laura Anne Gilman, and Joe Hill. The panel was moderated by Sandra Castori and Brett Savory, both from Cheesine Magazine. So I hope you can sit back, enjoy tonight's show, and I hope you're entertained. Thank you very much.
Is everyone hungover? Anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to keep this informal. I'm not going to do any sort of really formal questioning. It's like, when you wrote your magnum opus, the fireman, what did you... I'm not going to do that. We're just going to talk about whatever the hell we feel like talking about. I'll have a few questions and so on, and we'll open it up to the audience for the last half hour. Mostly, we're just, I think, going to shoot the shit. I'm not going to go down the panel and ask everyone to introduce themselves and say what they do, because that seems absurd at this point. But we're going to, keep it free and breezy, Does anybody want a cocktail? Or anything? All right? Frank wants a cocktail. All right. Get him a cocktail. I am going to ask our esteemed panelists to... Because everyone you can get your bios. They're in the book. You can Google the hell out of everybody. What I would like each of you to do is, Laura Ann, starting with you, is tell us something about yourself that no one here knows and that they can't Google about you.
No, wait a minute. I've been coming to Necon since I was 22. They know everything.
Now, if anybody else has one, jump in.
Yeah, I was going to say, somebody else, start down there. Start with Mark.
Mark? Go. He's got one ready. Some lint off here.
Thank you. I've killed a bunch of people. I was the lead singer in a punk band when I was 17. And we became quite notorious in Huddersfield, where I come from, because the punk band was called The Noise, and we had a following called the Noise Boys, and we did a kind of a college bands event, and the bouncers didn't like the fact that the Noise Boys were jumping around a lot, so they got quite worried about it. So after a couple of songs, we were told to leave the stage, and there was an enormous riot because of that. And the whole place was smashed up. I had nothing to do with that. I just left the stage.
Mark, Joe is disgusted with you.
Sorry, Joe.
I just can't listen to that.
And then we made headlines on the Huddersfield Examiner the next morning. And the headline was Huddersfield Riot. So of course then, no, Greenhead Riot, 'cause it was at Greenhead College. So then of course we wrote a song called Greenhead Riot. The chorus of which went, Greenhead Riot, don't you tell us to be quiet.
So is horror fiction the punk rock of the genres?
Of course.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Your turn.
It's not the chamber music, that's for sure. Let's see. I don't know what's interesting that's like something that wouldn't be, that, because I've been like I was an early adopter for Twitter, and I have something like 45,000 tweets. So at this point, there's nothing. I've already barfed up every trivial factoid about myself that could possibly, it's all sort of out there. When I completed a project, I celebrate by building something out of Legos. You know, when I never thought I would get the second novel written, and it was a great surprise to me when I actually did finish the thing. And when I was done, I said, you know, fuck that, I'm not going to write for weeks. And I took a couple weeks off, and I built the Lego Death Star with my boys. And I made a mix, a Star Wars mix. It had the first song on it was that the disco reinvention of, it was by, what was, Decca, and stuff. It was actually probably my best mix, but so I did that. So when I finished The Fireman, I built a 4,000-piece Tower of London, and I've got a specialized Lego kit that I bought online, so I was able to build Serenity. Stuff. Like there are modders, you know, they're everything you could possibly want to build you can get from a modder somewhere out there, and they'll send you all the pieces and like a homemade printed instruction manual. So I've got that, and I've got a TARDIS in my living room. It's not made out of Legos. I do have a Lego TARDIS as well, but I've got a TARDIS in the living room, and it seems to be coming through. It's like it phased in, coming through the wall.
Oh, nice.
And it makes all the sounds and stuff. And if you open the doors, it's bigger on the inside because it opens into like a reading nook. And it's really, I gotta tell you, it brings me so much peace to be like downstairs at 11:30 in my underwear and just see the police box light glowing across the room.
And once again, it's Necon, and we now know more about people than we really needed to.
Lorianne, have you thought of something that
I
you
have.
don't know?
One of the great joys on my Facebook page, we tend to have a lot of political discussions. And one of my great joys in shutting down people who are arguing against gun oversight when they accuse me of being anti-gun is that by the time I was 14, I was an NRA-rated sharpshooter. So think twice before you guys pick an argument with me.
That is very good. I like that. Just talking about, because you know music has come up a couple of times. Joe, I really feel that you should make Joe's mixtape and sell that, or have it downloadable for everyone. If that is the best mixtape ever, I think you should do that. But just musically, I know a lot of people when they're writing, write to music, want to have a soundtrack going on, or even have created a soundtrack for specific books that they have written. Do you listen to music? While you're writing, do you have soundtracks for the books that you've written? Mark, let's go back to you.
Actually, I don't. I have to have complete silence when I'm writing. But I play music all the rest of the time. So I have like, I don't know, 10 or 11,000 songs on my iPod, and I just put it on shuffle all the time. I still buy CDs, but then I put my CDs onto my iTunes, and then onto my iPod, and then I just put the whole thing on shuffle, because I love not knowing what's coming up next.
Yeah.
And I just know that with all the CDs I've got in my house, I just know that I'll keep picking the same ones. I'll keep picking my favourites, and some of them would just be left. So that's why I love having it on shuffle, because things crop up and I think, I've never heard this one before.
Gregorian chants?
Maybe not.
I've got those.
Yeah. But no, it has to be silent when I'm working.
Joe?
I feel like the internet has kind of ruined music in a way. Like it's interesting to hear you say that about, I don't want to sound like, one of these like Brooklyn lumbersexual hipsters or whatever, but I have kind of gone back to listening to all this stuff on vinyl, because the Apple Music has you pay for, you've got every album ever recorded in every genre, and it's just like having the last 120 years of music barfed into your face, and it's so much selection you actually can't choose anything. And you were saying you play the same CDs over and over again, but I yearn to fall into that rut. I don't want to be, and maybe because I do also write to music still a little bit occasionally, and if I was listening to something new, I can't write to it. So, but if I'm listening to Exile on Main Street,
So you can listen to stuff with lyrics while you're writing.
Absolutely, except when I'm writing dialogue. And when I'm writing dialogue, I have to hear the characters' voices. I can't hear mixed voice.
Yeah.
I'm very much a city child. I think a lot of it has to do with working in corporate for 16 years and always having something going on outside my office. I write best to the white noise of traffic and sirens and somebody talking somewhere that isn't my office. So sometimes I'll have a TV on like 3 rooms away just to have that noise. I think if you ever say, oh, I'm gonna go away for this retreat somewhere isolated, I'm like, I wouldn't write a goddamn word. Put me in a penthouse in the middle of the city so I can hear everything, and I'll have the book done by Tuesday. But I listen to music when I'm working out plot problems, which is usually also when I'm biking or running. There has to be music when I'm moving, because that's when I put I let my brain basically say, go do something else. We're gonna go sweat for a bit, and when we come back, we expect you to figure shit out. So I use music when I'm thinking about the book, but not when I'm actually writing the book.
So here's
Wait. I have to say that what I like to write to best is the outraged, guinea pig-like squeals of the critics.
I'm just going to stay with the music for a little bit, because I'm always curious. Like, what are you listening to right now? What are your favorite bands? Like, I want to know.
Mark's band.
Mark's band, for sure.
I do know that I've managed to work my Weird Stones Beatles obsession into every single book at this point. Every single, like, speaking of falling into a rut, every single book at some point, the characters stop talking about, you know, whatever's happening, the ghost that's after them, or the fact that the planet is burning up, to debate the relative merits of Mick and Keith versus, you know, McCartney versus Lennon. You know, so that's kind of I'm a big British Invasion guy. You know, I really feel like the albums the Beatles dropped on us in the 10 years they were together is to popular music what the plays of Shakespeare are to literature. You know, that it's going to be this thing we're going to be reckoning with for the next 400 years. You know, and I guess I would also include the solo stuff. I'm looking at Mark because he's English, so I feel like he has to say you know, like I do feel like, you know, if you take that and then you go on to, you know, the solo stuff, All Things Must Pass, and, you know, Lennon stuff, and some of the better McCartney material, you know, that you've got this, you've got, you know, The Merchant of Venice, and, you know, Richard III and Macbeth, and
Yeah, I mean, weirdly, the things like the Beatles and the Stones were the stuff that our parents listened to. So of course we hated that stuff. And I was 14 when punk came along. My favourite band are the Stranglers. In fact, I remember saying we had dinner about 6 weeks ago, and you'd never heard the Stranglers. I was going to bring you a bunch of Strangler stuff, and I forgot. So I will send you something.
good to know where I write.
Yeah, I thought you were coming in. But yeah, so the sort of things like the Sex Pistols and the Clash and the Damned. In fact, I'm going to go and see the Damned in November.
Yes!
God.
Unless I steal your ticket.
Yeah, because it's 40 years since the first punk single was released in the UK, which was a Damned song called New Rose, and they're now on tour. I can't believe that, you know, 40. If somebody told me 40 years ago that I would be seeing the Damned celebrating that single, I would never have believed.
Don't you think the first punk song was You Really Got Me by the Kinks?
Yeah, the Kinks were. In fact, the Kinks released kind of a punk album when punk came along, which it's really good.
What's the name of it? Do you know?
Yeah,
I'm gonna put you on the spot.
Yeah, I can't remember. It'll probably come to me, but I can't
Middle of
remember.
the panel, he'll still remember it.
Yeah, I'm sure you can Google it though. Just Google it. It'll be the
No
album that
cheating.
came out
No
about
cheating.
1977.
Yeah, I have a whole. You
Yeah.
can't Google it.
Yeah.
And you can't Google it either. We'll explain why later. But no.
Apparently I have eclectic taste. I was thinking, what have I been listening to most? And the two things I'm listening to most were the heavy and Acoustic Alchemy. And yes, before Ginger mentions anything, yes, and Springsteen. Shut up, Ginger. But I tend to heavy on jazz and rock, some alt, and I really like trance. Yeah, I know, you look at me and you think this is not a trance girl, but I get really bored with one style of music. And I can't, if I listen to it for too long, I'm like, okay, I can't listen to this anymore, I'm gonna scream. So I have to go and find something else.
I've got to say, my tastes are more eclectic now. I love Kate Bush, I love Joanna Newsom, people like that. My favourite bands at the moment, there's a band called Sleaford Mods, I don't know if anybody's heard of them. Just Guard again, obviously.
What are they called?
Sleaford Mods.
Sleeper?
Sleaford is a place in England.
That's what it sounds like.
Sleaford.
That's
Sleaford. Yeah. And there's another band called Slaves who are like a kind of a modern punk band. There's only 2 guys, but they make a hell of a noise.
My favorite album title of all time was the live album by The Replacements, which was called The Shit Hits the Fans.
I can recommend Brett's band, Old Time Moonshine. That was one of the typos in the program book, by the way. Jack Herringer. It's not old time moonshine, it's old time moonshine.
With an apostrophe.
Yeah, and they just got a little record deal, so.
Congratulations!
So go on the site, download the music, and sort of, what is it, like heavy
Stoner
metal?
rock, metal stoner rock kind of stuff, like heavy.
And I'm not a metal person at all. I'm like later British Invasion, English Beat, Adam and the Ants specials, that kind of stuff. But I actually, like some of their songs. I actually like some of the songs. We're way off topic, but what the fuck.
Yeah.
So, like, what you watching on TV? I'm seriously, because I'm curious as, like, everything, I think.
Everything's on hiatus right now.
But everything inspires the things that you're writing and creating and whatnot, and inspiration comes in strange and peculiar places. Like we were watching The Bachelorette, Jack Herringer, and you're
still
just like,
judging
look,
you.
and you're like, these whoring sea donkeys are amazing, and I should write something about that where it all goes horribly wrong. All right, so what do you think?
I'm not even done with Stranger Things. I've only watched the first 2 episodes, and I already want to write.
Good.
I already want to write the second season.
Yeah.
Someone give me the job to write the second season.
Yeah. Is everybody watching that? Have they? We barreled through it like crazy. Have you
See, but
seen
I don't
this?
understand that. It only just came out. Like when you buy a pie, do you eat the whole pie? Like you wanna spread it out, so you spread out your. And the thing is like okay, when the original Star Wars movies came out, you had 3 years. When Star Wars came out, you had 3 years between each movie to tell your own stories, to imagine your way into that universe, to sort of like play with the ideas, and it grew richer and deeper in the spaces in between.
I just got stale.
Now you don't have any time to dream about the characters. So it becomes this kind of here's what happens after you binge, you purge, and so you don't retain anything. It all comes back up and it doesn't have any lasting power. I think it's important to delay gratification, to spread out your pleasures across. We're all book people here, and this is one of the great pleasures of a book is that it takes 17 hours to finish, and you can't usually do it in one sitting.
Oh, I do it in one sitting. I'm a maniac, though. I'm not a normal person. But just going back to Stranger Things, what I love most about it is how right from the first episode, when we were watching it, that I just fell in love with those kids. Those kids are so great.
Yeah.
Some of us are still in the first episode. No spoilers.
Yeah,
I'm
no
not gonna say
spoilers.
anything,
I'm on
okay.
episode 2.
But just how they're written, and it's hard to write kids well. And I like how do you guys find it? Like if you're writing kids in books, do you find those voices harder because we are adults? It's harder to remember those voices.
No, I find it really easy. I find it really easy to tap into my childhood and how I felt when I was a kid. My first book, Toady, was written from the point of view of a bunch of kids, and I always feel really comfortable in that situation. And everything's exciting to kids, isn't it? They're not jaded, everything's really cool.
Or if they're jaded, it's in a very cute, kind of not really jaded way.
Yeah. So I love it. The thing is now, if you write something from a kid's point, I'm sure if I'd written Toady now, it would probably have been marketed as YA fiction, because all the main characters are all kind of 13, 14 years old. But coming back to Stranger Things, and coming back to what Joe said as well, about kind of binge watching stuff, I hadn't heard of Stranger Things until I came here, and then Chris was telling me how great it was, so I watched the first 4 episodes at Chris's house over the last few days. And we'll probably watch some more when we go back tomorrow. But I have a friend called Alan who I go to his house every Tuesday. Religiously, we go every Tuesday night, and we always watch a couple of series, about 3 series and a movie, and we only allow ourselves to watch 1 episode a week. So this is how, I mean, we love like kind of The Walking Dead and things like that, but we even if it finishes on an absolute cliffhanger and we desperately want to watch the next episode, we don't allow ourselves to watch it until the following week.
Disciplined.
Yeah.
Well, then sometimes
Yeah.
it's not discipline. Sometimes it's, I mean, in my case, I just can't sit for that long. Yeah, I gotta get up and move. As I said, I don't exercise because I like exercising. I exercise because I can't sit that long.
Did you have the Jimmy leg in school?
Oh yeah. My parents used to send me into the basement to run around for about half an hour before they sent me to school so that I could actually sit. No lie.
Yeah.
Something else you didn't know.
There you go.
Yeah. For TV, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. No.
Yeah, I am just now second season of Penny Dreadful. Because TV for me is a reward when I've actually gotten everything else done. So then I get to go. And because I was on a massive deadline for a client project, I'm only now watching the last episodes of Person of Interest. And yeah, I'm ready for my heart to be broken when I get back. But yeah, I don't actually have, I have very basic cable and not a lot of time, so I'm usually catching up. Everybody's like, oh, did you watch that? I'm kind of like, no, I'll watch that next. I don't watch a hell of a lot of TV, and more often I'll come home and my brain says, and now we're going to watch MASH reruns.
I'd be interested to know actually, because I would regard binge watching as maybe watching about 3 episodes, and then maybe having a break and watching another 3 episodes the next day. But are there any people in the audience who've actually watched, say, 10 episodes in a row or something? Wow.
Right here.
Yeah, I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
You know, we have gone through this amazing period for television, though, where, you know, what people have said about shows like Breaking Bad, or Stranger Things, or, you know, The Americans, Sons of Anarchy. You know, you hear people say these are novels for television. And we heard this for years and years, and it's funny how, you know, one art form will then feed into another or suggest new approaches in another art form. When I worked on The Fireman, I knew it was going to be a long book, and I decided I was going to write it like it was a cable TV series. So it was actually, so, you know, they were saying cable TV series have these novelistic feels, and when I got a review that said The Fireman reads like a cable TV series, I felt like, yeah, that's what I was going for. You know, it's 8 books. It's divided into 8 parts, and each part has its own episodic arc to it, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And then there's the larger storyline, which goes across the whole. And you know, that's a very old way that's the Dickensian approach, a very old approach to storytelling that I think people are weirdly hooked on. Maybe because our own lives are episodic. You have certain narratives throughout your life. There's there was the episode where you had the health scare. You know, there's the episode where the dog disappeared and the whole household was out looking for the dog for 3 days before you found him. You know, and I mean, like, and so we kind of think that way, and we also, the great joy of fiction is falling in love with these make-believe people. You know, and I'm just so crazy about the family and the Americans, and you just want to see them fight their way out of trouble again and again, and it never gets old.
Yeah. Lorianne, you were going to say something?
No, it's just interesting to say that because when I was writing, when I'm writing The Devil's West, I was very much basing it more on the styling of a feature movie, because there aren't chapters, there are parts. So you get within each, there's the equivalent of a block of time you'd be watching a movie, rather than the cable, the slightly different timing. But yeah, it was very much, I was thinking in terms of visuals and how people would be seeing the story as much as how much they'd be reading the story, and how it's consumed that way. So it definitely impacts how you're creating.
I actually did want to ask this question of you specifically because I have sort of come late to like Westerns and loving Westerns largely through having read Robert B. Parker's Westerns and revisiting that genre. Like, what made you choose that milieu, that sort of and Weird West? Weird West.
I did not realize I was writing Weird West until somebody said, "Oh, it's Weird West." I went, "I guess," because I always think of Weird West as being the Old West, which actually starts in about 1820. and this is set 1802. I'm just a history geek, and the transfer of what would have been the Louisiana Purchase to the United States is such a pivotal moment in history that I basically wanted to fuck with it. And basically play on all the darker elements of American exceptionalism and say, but what if, and mess with that. So it wasn't so much that I was dealing with the American West as I was dealing with the question of frontiers.
Oh, okay. Good answer. Joe, Mark, what about you guys? Are there periods of history either in America or England or other parts of the world that you're fascinated with or that you want to explore in future books?
I've actually explored quite a few because I've just written a big time travel trilogy, and the second part is set mainly in Victorian London, which I've written about before. I've done a Doctor Who book set in Victorian London. That's great fun. It's always really fascinating to do. And then the third part is set in the First World War, so the trenches of the First World War. And again, that was really fascinating to research, because there's things you just kind of don't think about until you actually start researching them. Like, I had never actually thought about how did the soldiers get to the trenches. You know, I just kind of thought the trenches were just there, and they were, I don't know, how did they get to them?
They just walked up to them and went inside.
And it turns out that there were miles and miles and miles of communication tunnels stretching back from the trenches all the way to the kind of the headquarters, which were out of range of the bombs, and they were tramping through just basically liquid mud up to their knees, and and they would tramp sometimes for 8-10 hours to get to the trenches themselves. So by the time they arrived, they were all exhausted. They were
Then
all
they have to fight.
plastered in mud. Yeah, the trenches were full of rats and fleas.
Trench foot and all
and
those
it was just
wonderful
horrific. Yeah. So I've done that, and then I've written a Doctor Who book set in 1947 India, which was when India was handed back to the Indian people from the British. That was really interesting, and there were loads of uprisings because there were loads of different factions all fighting for that bit of land, and of course Gandhi was around, so it's basically Doctor Who meets Gandhi, which was great. What else have I done?
Which doctor?
It was.
Who's your doctor?
It was, well, that one was my doctor. My doctor is Tom Baker, but that was a David Tennant.
Well, both of them Victorian. Was the Victorian a David Tennant as well?
The Victorian one
Both
was
10th Doctor?
no. The Victorian one was an 8th Doctor, so I was commissioned to do that after the Paul McGann movie, and then when it became obvious that the movie wasn't going to lead to a series, the BBC did a series of 8th Doctor books. So I wrote one of the early ones. So it's basically the Zygons in Victorian London with the 8th Doctor.
Wasn't it great when they brought McGann back for like 10
Yeah,
seconds?
yeah. I think they might do it again. I really think they might do it again.
He was robbed. He
I
was
don't have
pretty
any
good.
insights, but I think he might.
It wasn't his fault Fox made a crappy pilot. He was
No.
pretty good.
Yeah, he was good. Yeah.
It's nice. Everyone's a Doctor Who fan?
Everyone's a Doctor Who fan. Yeah.
No.
Wait.
That's not about you, Ryo.
On a ranging scale from, yeah. We all have our favorite doctors.
I don't really read much in genre because because I don't want to cross myself up. I don't want to if I'm writing a ghost story, I don't want to read other people's ghost stories because I don't want to have their ghost stories in my head when I'm trying to figure out how my ghost would act. My reading is more important to me than my writing. If I had to choose between whether I could continue being a reader or continue being a writer, it'd be a really easy choice. I'd choose being a reader and find something else to do. So I love fiction, and what I do read instead of horror and fantasy is I read a lot of crime fiction, but I read a lot of historical fiction. Historical fiction is sort of my jam. I think the greatest series characters ever is not Sherlock Holmes and Watson, but Aubrey and Matron from the Patrick O'Brien novels, which are just so incredible, so great. But in terms of writing historical stuff, I'm dying to, but I'm also afraid. I'm afraid to screw it up.
Oh yeah.
And I've only done it once so far, and I'm going to do it some more. But I kind of have a plan for how to do it safely. The one time I did it as a single standalone issue in Lock and Key. There's a story where my heroes go back to the Revolutionary War and discover the roots of Key House. And I knew I'd be okay, because a comic book is, you know, a novel is a painting on a, you know, on the scale of like Bosch, you know, and a comic book is more like a light sketch. You know, you can indicate some stuff with the costumes and, you know, in a few panels. So I was able to do the Revolutionary War in 32 pages. And, you know, and I want to go back and do some lock and key stories set in the Civil War and the Revolutionary War and World War II. And I feel like if I warm up, if I do the research and I do the reading and I pull the comics off, then maybe I'll have the bravery to do it just straight with prose with no pictures to save me.
Laura?
Yeah, I gotta tell you, I just recently, for my patrons, did a whole rant entitled "History Will Fuck You Up." As a historian, there's no way in hell that you can ever not fuck it up. There will always be something wrong, because if history does not, like life, does not fit neatly into plots, and facts will, so just give up. Don't, just dive in, pray for the best.
I think, you can do what Guy Kay does, which is just choose your favorite period of time, but set it in a fantasy world, and then anything you get wrong is just, you know, well, this is my world, so it's fine.
I have this people always like, well, can't you just fudge that, the Devil's West? I said, no, this is exactly what was happening here, and this was the actual history, and I have to use that because this is as real as I can get it. And yeah, no, Guy Kay and I have had that conversation before, and he's wrong.
I agree. Yeah, I'm with you.
Just touching on, this was actually a question I wanted to ask Joan. You already touched on it, which is, you know, do you read? What are you reading when you're writing? Are you reading at all? And as you said, you know, do you avoid certain things because you know you don't want to be influenced by it? And like, I'm totally influenced by other people's voices, which is terrible. So I was reading Faye Weldon a great deal, and everything I wrote was really waspish and biting. And so then I'm like, that is not my voice. I gotta calm down. Did you want to touch on that again, Joe, and then we'll go to the other two?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not that worried about my prose style shifting. You know, after I've gone through five drafts, you know, I mean, it's like, you know, all my farts smell the same. You know, isn't that a really lyrical way to describe it?
No, I think that was pretty lyrical.
I think that's the quote of the weekend.
You know, it's just always like, I have these fantasies of writing a story that wouldn't sound like me, but it always just kind of comes out sounding like me, no matter how much I want it not to be. So I don't remember the question. What was the question?
Oh, just you know.
What do I read? What do I read?
Mostly
Mostly I just read like the writers that really psych me up. You know, like I read a lot of Elmore Leonard. I read a lot of Patrick O'Brien. I will read. You know, Neil Gaiman, but usually not when I'm working on a novel. You know, because because he's got so many great ideas, you know, and I don't want any of them sticking in there when I'm working on a book. So,
Mark.
I read a lot of books. I read sort of 60, 70 books a year, which I'm sure some people read more. But so I'm always reading, you know, a book every kind of 5 days or something, and I read in and out of genre. It doesn't really worry me what I'm working on. I can kind of divorce myself from what I'm reading to my own work. It doesn't kind of cross over, and I don't feel as though I'm influenced by other people's voices. So I read a lot of you know, horror writers and genre writers, the kind of people that we would all read. Particular writers that I really like, kind of mainstream writers. There's quite a few British writers I really like. Sarah Waters, I love.
Yeah, I love
She's
Sarah
fantastic. Rupert Thompson I really like, Magnus Mills, I don't know if you know these guys. Who else? Yeah. And then there's certain books, Donna Tartt's Secret History, and you know. Yeah, I read some crime fiction.
I'm reading that right now.
You're reading it now?
Did you see me walking around? I'm actually reading Donna Tartt's
I noticed it, yeah, I noticed you
right
had
now.
it, yeah.
I like that so
Fantastic
much.
book.
I couldn't bear to finish it, and I stopped reading it. And then I had to go back and start it again and finish it.
Oh, David Mitchell, he's another
Yeah.
writer, he's superb. I dip in and out of crime. I love James Lee Burke.
Yeah.
I don't know too much about crime fiction, but I kind of dip in and out, and I want to read more. I just started actually reading, years and years ago I read an Agatha Christie book and thought it was terrible. I just thought it was so clunky and dull, and so it really put me off kind of reading any more Agatha Christie. And then last year we went to Agatha Christie's house, we had a look around, and there was a little shop, and I thought, while I'm here, I might as well buy an Agatha Christie book and give it another try.
Like super
Yeah, and you read them in about a day and a half or something. And what I didn't realise when I was younger, what I didn't appreciate was how incredibly brilliant she is at plotting.
Yeah.
Her work is at best functional, but it's not so bad. I don't find it so bad now that it puts me off. So I've now vowed to read every Agatha Christie book over the next 20 years. So it's like one every 3 months.
Just on the Agatha Christie point, I'm actually a huge fan, and I've read all of them, and I think that she is a terrible writer but a brilliant storyteller, which I think, and she's really funny. My favorite line is, "But whenever a man is truly in love, he can't help but look like a sheep." She is full of lines like that that are just so terrific. But anyway, Laura, I'm going back to you on what are you reading and who do you like?
At any given time, I've got nonfiction open. That's my geek. My history background, and I just love. That's how I fill the storeroom. I'm constantly reading American history, European history, science books, just feeding the brain. I joke that my brain is basically the storeroom, and everything gets thrown in there, and when something crashes and falls over on something else, that's when a book comes out. I don't read in the particular genre or subgenre that I'm working in. Like when I'm working in Devil's West, I'm not reading any Weird West. When I'm working on short fiction, I don't read other short fiction. Not because I'm afraid that the ideas will stick, it's that I'm afraid I'll read something else and go, oh well, hell, they've already done it, why should I even bother? Yes, I can be inspired, but also more likely I'm going to say, well, I need to find some other hole to dig into. I don't read as fast as I used to. I used to joke that publishing takes people who really love books and makes them too tired to read.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm also still freelance editing, so at any given time there's a client manuscript also on my desk. But I actually love mysteries. I'm not a Dame Agatha fan. I'm a Dorothy Sayers fan.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's two very distinct schools of that.
Have you read Tana French?
she's great.
I try to recommend her to everyone who likes mysteries. Her first book, In the Woods, is one of the most brilliant mysteries I've ever read, and it's not really a mystery. I mean, there is a mystery, but that's not what it is. So if you haven't read it, go and read her work.
And what I'm doing right now, because I'm sort of taking break and things, is I have an entire backlog of all the Tor.com novellas that I'm finally getting a chance to read, and that's fun.
I just want to jump in and say a couple things off what Laura was just saying. One is about the anxiety of influence and finding someone else has already done what you were doing. I met Guillermo del Toro a few years ago, and he was showing off his notebook, and there was this amazing beastie in one of the notebooks. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was just this incredible, freakish monster. I said, "Oh, you got to stick that in something." And he said, "I was going to," and then this other director had it in his film. And he said, it's always a race. Whatever your brilliant idea is, there's always 5 other people working on the same idea. And it's always a race to see who's going to get there first. And it sounds kind of incredible, but I have this story I've got about 80 pages of about a child who's got a third eye, and he's got a lens in his forehead, and he can project movies onto the wall. And the story has come together. It really was not finished yet, though. And I was I went to go see a movie. I went to go see Ghostbusters a couple weeks ago, and I'm sitting there, and the preview came up for Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children.
Oh, yeah.
God fucking damn it, there's a fucking kid in the film, and he's got a projector for an eye, and he's projecting his movies. I'm fucking Ransom Riggs, get me out of my story, But this can happen, is that there's a whole bunch of us who love the same stuff, and
That's why you get 2 volcano movies out of Hollywood in the same year.
Yeah. So there's that. And then mysteries. I don't know. I don't know. I'm going to see how.
All right.
I've been in Necon for too long, so now it's all sort of going soft on me. Yeah.
All right. Now let's ask some more embarrassing questions. What I'm gonna ask you all is two-parter. What's the worst thing you ever wrote? And what's your most embarrassing moment? They may be the same thing, I don't know. So what do you think? Mark, shall we start with you?
Yeah, I can't think of any embarrassing moments.
Oh, we don't.
Also, the worst thing you ever wrote.
Possibly this moment when I'm crying in
This
front
moment
of a
here.
huge audience. No, well, the worst thing I ever wrote, I think, was recently. I was asked to write a Spartacus novel, which isn't brilliant. I think I did a decent job, but I was asked to write a Spartacus novel because a writer had dropped out. And my agent said, would I be prepared to do it? They would offer me decent money if I could do it in 3 weeks because somebody had dropped out. And I said, okay, the money is pretty good, but I have to tell you, I've never seen the series, and I know nothing about ancient Rome or gladiators. But if they're happy with that, then I'll do it. And sure enough, they couriered me the series overnight. I watched it all the next day. That was the only time I have binge watched a series, and I was having to keep pausing it to make notes and stuff like that. The other writer had done I think he'd done like half a prologue or something, and he had a little sketchy kind of idea of what he wanted to do next, and I was asked to use that because they needed to use the same title. So I kind of used his ideas and then embellished them and changed them a little bit. And I just had to rush. I just had to really rush it. And I was Googling things as I was doing it because I don't know if many of you have seen. Yeah, well, I don't know if any of you have seen Spartacus, but it's basically about a kind of gladiatorial school. So I can say gladiatorial school. They're all slaves, run by a slave master. But it's up on a hill above Rome. And so as I was writing it, they were talking about kind of needing water and things like that. And I suddenly thought, how the fuck do they get water at the top of a hill? So I was having to Google whether they'd have donkeys carrying it up from below, or whether they had some sort of
Plenty of grip book. Press the
plumbing
Uber app
system.
on his phone.
Yeah, and half of this stuff I didn't use, but I was just Googling stuff as I went and thinking, oh, that'll do, I'll stick that in. I think it turned out okay, but it had to be 80,000 words. I think I did about 72,000. And the publisher said,
in 3 weeks?
we'll go
That's
that. Yeah. So that's probably doesn't hold up brilliantly, but I think I did okay in the 3 weeks I was given to do it.
So,
the worst piece of work I'll admit to was my first comic book, my Spider-Man story, my 11-page story. I just choked. I mean, I was just so excited. I had never, by the time I wrote it, I had given up on the idea I was ever going to be a published novelist. I had written 4 novels I couldn't sell. And I just thought, you took your swing and you missed, but I had written some short stories. And I knew I could write a good short story, and a few of them had won prizes or got in best of collections. And on the basis of one of those stories, I earned a chance to write a Spider-Man story at Marvel. At the time, there was a talent scout who was pulling people in from other careers, so finding poets and short story writers and playwrights and seeing if they wanted to write about the X-Men and Spider-Man. And I surfed in on this, sort of tryout, these Marvel tryout titles. And one of them was Spider-Man Unlimited, and the other one was X-Men Unlimited. And I'm not horribly ashamed of the story, but it's just a Spider-Man story. It doesn't do anything interesting or new or fresh with the character. It doesn't, it feels utterly and perfectly forgettable in every facet except for the art. And then I did a short story called The Saved that was published as a limited edition by PS Publishing, and I think it's gorgeously written, but Jesus, what a bore. so dull, just eye-glazingly dull. It is literally just the story of a man driving in the snow. Slow drive to nowhere.
I just thought of an embarrassing moment, actually. It's just occurred to me. It's to do with writing. When I wrote my first novel, Toady, it came back. It was published. It came back from the publishers, and we had some friends over for dinner. And I just put a great long list of all my friends that have been supporting me over the last couple of years. So we had this couple over for dinner, and the book had arrived that day. And we were talking about it, and I was really excited. And I said to them, you're even in the acknowledgements. I put you in the acknowledgements, and I went and got the book, showed it to them, and I'd forgotten to put them in. They were the only friends that I forgot to put in.
But then you just blamed it on.
I know.
But then you just blamed it on the publisher, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I definitely said
Those
that.
assholes.
Yeah.
Damn it, I know you were in the proofs, yeah.
Yeah.
For me, I have two works that I'm not going to say they're the worst I've written, that I'm most disappointed in. The first was the first short story that I ever sold, in that I knew at the time that I was trying for something very, very ambitious, and I managed competent. And it was competent enough because I hit all the editor's buttons, so he bought it. But I look at it now and I'm thinking, oh my God, really? So that's sort of sad. And the other one is the first Buffy book that I co-wrote. I loved it, I loved the idea, I loved the dialogue, but I was working at the time with somebody who firmly believed in good enough for tie-in. And this was my first pro novel, and I let myself be guided by that. And afterwards I felt so crappy. I'm like, I'm never doing that again. I'm never settling for, okay, this is fine, this is good enough, because I can't, I'm not gonna be able to live with that going forward. Yeah, there are time constraints to everything, and I said, but if I'm thinking, it's fine, it'll do. No, I'm never doing that again. The most embarrassing moment, I've been carrying this around for years, I'm going to have to redact this carefully because some of the people involved are in the room, I think. I was a very, very baby editor. Not quite my first pro convention, but one of my first pro conventions. My first pro SIFWA party, and I may have had a little too much to drink.
What?
I did say baby pro. And I opened my mouth and I said something that probably was pretty funny, but was also incredibly inappropriate to my then boss. And she looked at me, and I looked at her, and I said, I think I've had too much to drink, and I'm going to bed now. And she said, that's a good idea. Oh. Ginger, thank you for not firing me.
I hope you're enjoying the show. We have a remote show for you tonight. You've been watching the Necon special program from Bristol, Rhode Island. Again, it's where a bunch of us writers and fans get together and learn a few things and have some great discussions. You just heard a little bit about Laura's inappropriate remark to her boss and the comical results from that. And coming up, we got stories from all three moderators talking about how they write stories, talking about comic books, and talking about their tie-in novels. So please, I hope you stay tuned for the second half of the show.
Just because we've been talking about comic books and short stories and novels, and these are all very different. I mean, they're all stories, but they're all very different ways of writing things. And I've often heard it said that writing a short story is in fact much harder than writing a novel. You have much less time to do what you want to do. So I'm throwing this out to everyone. Stories versus novels versus screenplays versus graphic novels and comic books, tie-ins, which you've done as well. What do you think are the benefits and the pros and cons of it, the drawbacks,
Of all those ones?
Yeah, whichever one you care to compare and contrast. Mark, let's start with you.
The drawbacks of tie-ins are definitely the tight deadlines. The fact that they usually want a specific number of words. I mean, I've done Doctor Who novels, and they have 50,000 words. They had to be between 49 and 51,000 words. So you really had to hit the mark, so you couldn't afford to write under or to write over. The screenplays. I've done audio dramas. The tough bit of that I found was having written prose for a long time. Is trying to get action over on audio. It's trying, especially I've done Doctor Who audio dramas, and they're very fast moving, and it's trying to. First of all, it's trying to describe things that we don't normally see, so aliens and spaceships and things, without making it obvious. So, oh look, there's a big green three-eyed monster coming towards us, kind of thing. And also there's certain action scenes. I remember in my first audio drama, there's a scene where two characters are running away from, I think it's some sort of monster, and they have to pass something over as they're doing it. And that was really hard to get over on audio. I found it really, really difficult to do. So a lot of that is just a kind of a learning process. What was the other things as well? I've never done comics.
Yeah, stories, a short story versus.
I like the variety. I like the variety of doing things. I really like moving from one thing to another. And I think, yeah, I mean, short stories, it's obviously just has to be one really tight, good idea. And there's not a lot of room for kind of meandering around, and whereas there is a little bit in a novel, obviously you still got to, make sure that the story is moving along all the time. But there's more room to breathe, more room to expand. Yeah, I think that's about it.
I've never written a screenplay. I have, however, written stage plays. And the complication there is you have to make every gesture, every word much larger than you do for anything else. It has to project to a much wider stage. It's not close in. And that, coming from, I was writing short stories and then I was doing the stage play. And going from short stories where you're very tight focus and it's very intimate to something where you have to broaden it was incredibly difficult, but it was a really good learning experience. I'm not sure I ever want to do it again, but it was an interesting experience. Short fiction versus novels, I write them for completely different reasons, so I can't really compare and contrast. When I'm writing a short story, I'm working something out for myself, and when I write a novel, I'm sharing something I've already worked out. So to me, that they're completely different situations. I love the tightness and the careful consideration that a short story requires, where you have every word has to work double duty. But you're also listening to somebody who writes haiku for fun. I'm actually a published poet, God help me.
Woo, poets, yeah!
I'm a published poet who got paid really well. Yeah, it'll never happen again, but I love that requirement of having precision in the words that you choose, but I also love having the room to sprawl in a book. So yeah, I can't say there's plus, because they're completely different creatures for me.
Joe?
I thought you were going to say you love that experience of opening an envelope with a check in it. Who
doesn't?
Man? That's great. Oh, it feels good.
Oh, actually, it was direct deposit. It was even better.
I don't really have a preference. I just like making shit up. You know. Yeah.
All right.
All good.
I was going to say, that's all you get.
That's
That's
apparently all I'm gonna get. Where are we for time? Okay. I'm going to open it up to questions in a minute, but before we do that, I actually, I don't know if you guys watch Inside the Actors Studio, I do like what he asks at the end, where it's like, what would you like to hear have God say to you when you arrive at the pearly gates? So that's part one, because I always like to add, what would you like to hear Satan say if you arrive in the other place? So, Mark, you want to go first, or Joe?
No.
The social media is terrible. You don't want to be. The night that Dick Cheney died, I was seized by an overwhelming desire to write that Dick Cheney was arriving at the gates of hell, and that Satan was going to greet him and throw an arm around him and say, "Brother." And I'm like, no, dude, he died. He's not even cold yet. And
He was cold to begin with.
Oh, I said Dick Cheney. He's still alive. I meant Scalia. I knew it was someone. I'm sorry.
He was anticipating.
I knew it was someone who lived his life red ass and angry and absolutely sure he was right on everything, even when he was clearly abundantly wrong. And it's just easy to confuse. They are assholes of such a similar type that it's hard to keep track of which is which. So it's like two people. Remember, I Dream of Jeannie, and there were two different Jeannies.
Yeah,
two different what?
Two different Darrens.
Oh, was it two different Darrens and one Genie? Okay, well, it was like there were two different Darrens, and it's like, Cheney and Scalia are like the same Darren, so anyway, I don't want to say whether I reject the idea of God or Satan. But I heard about this thing that they're doing in Norway now, where when you die, they kind of mulch you, they kind of make you into mulch, and they fill this sack with like the liquefied remains, and they put a seed in it, and they grow a tree out of you.
That's what I'm doing.
And that's what I want to do. I mean, I would like a little more information about the process. I want to know how long until my face appears in the side of the tree. Like the
You're going to be in the
faces-
Godwood.
like the faces in Games of Thrones or an Ent or something like that. I just think that would be so great, you know, if there was a me tree with like, you know. So, anyway.
Lorianne, have you thought about what you want either God or Satan to say to you?
Oh, it's the same thing.
Yeah. Okay.
The bar's open.
That's right. Mark, or did you care to say anything, or you were just like, no?
I deny you. No.
Yeah, I'm probably not going to be funny about this, but I think I would just want God to say that I was a great dad. My kids thought I was a great dad. That would be the most important thing. I know that's not funny, but honestly, that's what you know is most important to me.
Yeah.
And then what about Satan?
I would want Satan to say, "You were too good a dad. You can't come in here."
Yeah, I just assumed that it would be Satan, and he would say like, "Your Necon buddies are all in here." So I was just like, "We'll have a good time. It's okay." So we've got about a half an hour left. So why don't we open the floor to questions for our esteemed ghosts of honor?
Ghosts of Honor?
Not yet, but soon, like Dick
I'd
Cheney.
sort of like to be a ghost more than meet God or the devil. Even if my life was reduced to this kind of fragmentary repeating of like the last 30 seconds of my life, you know, like get the gun, running, looking in the drawers, and then like it stops, and then like 3 months later, get the gun, or something like that. I don't know. Go ahead. They're supposed to ask questions.
Yeah,
though.
questions, comments.
I have a question for Mark, getting back to Agatha Christie, because I grew up a big Agatha Christie fan, but within the last couple of years, I rediscovered one of her contemporaries that I hadn't heard of, Ethelina White, who I just think blows Agatha Christie right out of the water.
All right.
She wrote The Spiral Staircase, which was made into a movie, and The Lady Vanishes, and
Oh.
I thought The Spiral Staircase was one of the creepiest things I've read in the last like,
I'm
5 or
making
6
note of the
years.
name.
I'm making a note too.
And it makes me sad that Ethelina
Ethelina.
With an E.
White.
With an E.
Yes.
Okay.
And The Spiral Staircase was the creepiest things I've read in the last 3 or 4 years. It's just,
That was made into a film
that
too?
was made
I
a
think?
film in the 1940s.
Yeah.
And she wrote a short story that became one of the creepiest TV episodes I've ever seen. It was part of Alfred Hitchcock's Presents. And I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning, couldn't sleep, I put the TV on and it came on, and I watched that, and that's how I discovered who she was. The episode frightened, it was just one of the scariest things I've ever seen on television. It was called An Unlocked Window. And I sought out who the author was and just led to her novel. And it was just, it's amazing to discover like a new old writer.
That's great. Questions? Questions, comments?
Answers?
Answers? Mr. Golden?
I was actually just wondering if Joe will ever publish, at least in a 200-copy Necon edition, the fantasy novel that was discussed in the profile of him.
Oh, the Fear Tree.
Yeah.
So I wrote these 4 novels I was never able to sell. There was one called Paper Angels. There was a YA fantasy called The Evil Kites of Dr. Lords. And there was The Fear Tree. And I spent 3 years on The Fear Tree, and I just thought I crushed it. I just thought and it got turned down everywhere in America. And it got turned down by every publisher in London, and then for a final kick in the nuts, it was turned down by every publisher in Canada.
Did you go to Cheesy? No. They didn't publish anyone.
Like Christopher Golden.
And Mark Morris.
No comment. The problem with any temptation to publish The Fear Tree is that I've mercilessly rated it for other stories at this point. Almost everything that's good in that book has been published in some other book. You know, and I think that speaks to a point, you know, that comes up a lot when I talk to people about writing. When you know, you do a panel or something where you talk about how to become a published writer or how to find your way in the craft. And I think when you decide you want to be a writer, you start making time every day, and you're like, I'm going to spend half an hour every day, I'm going to spend an hour every day, I'm going to write 2 pages or whatever. And that's a hard decision to make. But when it gets really hard is when you spend a whole year and you write a novel. And it's the first novel you've written, you've taken an hour every day, hours you could have spent with your kids or your friends, you could have been reading, you could have been going for a walk, you could have been, you know, doing any of a number of things, but instead you spent it writing this novel. And guess what? The novel sucks. It's your first novel, and it's really bad. Nothing works in it. And I think that thought, even just the possibility of it, forget living through it, just imagining that possibility is so demoralizing that a lot of aspiring writers wilt before they ever get to it. But the truth is that there's no story that didn't serve some good purpose. Every story is productive. Even the worst disaster that you've written may have elements in it that you can strip mine later for other stories. The Fear Tree was the first draft of a book that I later rewrote as The Surrealist Glass. After Heart-Shaped Box, I was trying to figure out the second novel, and I went back to The Fear Tree, and I took one of the central ideas from it and wrote a horrible, shitty novel called The Surrealist Glass, a total botch. But it had, the Fear Tree at the center of it had a blind man who had the psychic power. Every time he touched someone, he came in contact with them, he always knew what they were most afraid of. He could always see deep into what had scared them in the course of their life and what fears they still held on to. And in The Surrealist Glass, this guy had a lens he could look through. And when he looked through it at a person, he could see the secret truth of who they really were, represented in surreal terms, and that didn't work either. And then I chucked the book and I started again from scratch. Only this time, instead of giving him a lens, I gave him horns. And that became the book Horns. And there are several chapters in Horns that existed, not quite word for word, but very much in intent, in earlier versions in The Surrealist Glass and The Fear Tree. And so that's the kicker is you can spend 7 or 8 years writing stuff that no one wants to read and that's all complete garbage at the time. But you know, the thing about garbage and the thing about waste and trash is that's compost. That's the compost you use to grow stuff that actually will bear fruit.
Or your dead body when...
Right, or to hide the dead bodies.
This is actually something that I'm always fascinated by, and we'll come back to the audience in a second, but do you think you can teach writing? Because I know a lot of writers who think that you can't. You either have that knack or the talent, like a musician, you know, you have that ability. You can maybe train to be better at certain things, but you have to have that inner thing first. Or do you think you can take someone who just doesn't know how to do it at all and teach them how to be a writer and even possibly a good writer? Do you think, Lorianne?
I know that you can teach someone how to be a better craftsperson.
Yeah.
You can teach them how to take what they have and hone it and make it better. And you can teach somebody who didn't know how to write. It is much harder to teach somebody how to be a storyteller, because that's a sense of innate rhythm. And it's I'm not gonna say it can't be taught, but I don't think it can be taught in a classroom.
I've done a few taught a few writing courses, and I've always found it really frustrating if there are usually 1 or 2 writers who've got a bit of a spark, and if they've got that spark, it's immediately noticeable, and you just try and encourage that spark. Yeah, but you just try and encourage it, and you just know that they've got something. But there are so many writers whose prose just lies dead on the page, and they make many fundamental errors. And I found that no matter how many times you tell them that they're making these errors, you tell them that they're using too much description or whatever it might be, they will keep going back and making the same errors again and again and again. I find it quite a demoralising process. I don't do it out of choice. Occasionally, I'm approached and people say, would I be prepared to teach a 10-week or 12-week writing course? and I always grudgingly say yes just for the money, but I never look forward to it. And I do my very best, but it's always the same. It's always the same.
I do think that a lot of young aspiring writers, and I hear this question a lot of times at readings, you know, someone will say, what's one great piece of advice you were given? You know, what's the best piece of advice you ever got? And I think when people ask that question, and I understand it, and I understand the intent behind it, you know, someone is sort of hoping there's a magic incantation. There's one piece of advice that's a key you can turn in the lock to open the door to make a hard job easy. And you know, the awful thing is I've known so many great teachers and so many great writers, and I've had lots and lots of good advice, but it's like the thing, you know, Alice says in Alice in Wonderland, I've often given myself good advice, but I just never listened to it. You know, and most of what I learned about writing, I didn't get from anything anyone told me, and you know, and I got it because I read a lot of really, really good books, and I made a study of them. When I found, sometimes I would find a story that I just loved, so I'd read it again, and then I'd read it again, and I, with a highlighter and a pencil, and I'd make notes in the margins and try to figure out how Kelly Link pulled it off, or you know, how David Mitchell pulled it off, and you know, you're unpacking things and the other thing is, you know, I started writing on a daily basis when I was 12, and I've written every single day with, you know, only a few exceptions ever since I was 12, and it's like, you know, you build a career like you build a stalactite, you know, with one little dirty drip at a time, and eventually that piles up into something, and that's it. I mean, I don't know what you could tell someone that's like it. This is the problem with teaching.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know what you could tell someone that would actually make a difference. The only thing that makes a difference is reading a lot and writing a lot and doing it and deciding that you enjoy it regardless of the day-to-day or year-to-year results.
In many ways, writing, like editing, is less a classroom learned thing and more of an apprenticeship. If you study with somebody or with several somebodies serially, you can learn from example, you can learn from observation, you can learn from reading good stuff, also from reading really shitty stuff, and saying, why didn't that work for me? But it's a classroom setting is really difficult because everybody's at a different level, and there is no one teaching, no one lesson that is going to teach people what they need to know. And I think that's why it's really hard to quote unquote teach writing. You can show writing, you can share writing, you can do all of that, but I don't know that you can teach it.
Yeah, it's I'm always on the fence about that. I think, yeah, there are things that maybe you can show people how to do, as you say, like an apprenticeship, but to actually say, okay, this is how your first sentence should work, and let's go from there. Like, it just seems impractical and also absurd.
You want to know one good piece of advice? I got one good piece of advice. If you want to write horror stories, Steve Jones has a collection, Best New Horror. He's done it for what? How long has Steve Jones been doing this? 26 years? They're all online. Go buy them off Amazon. So go buy all 26 books, then read all 26 books. Read all this. You've got to read the introductions and the afterwards and all the rest of it. But read the stories in each book. If you just did that for a year, if you just read, you know, all the stories in all 26 books, and you gave that a year of your life, by the end of it, you know something about how a good horror story works. You know, if you buy, you know, Best American Science Fiction, or, you know, the Best American Crime Stories, and you just read them, just wallowed in them, you know, and you made that your life at a certain. There was a guy who bought Best American Short Stories, the whole collection. He was like a grad student who wanted to learn how to write, and he read like the first 20 books. I mean, he just read the first 20 books. He didn't take any breaks. He just read through all the stories. And he's like, I started to realize that the Best American Short Stories, the most prestigious anthology in America, was just another market with very specific tastes and very specific likes and dislikes. The editors had a taste, you know, and you could learn that taste. Just like if you binged on reading, you know, Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine or analog science fiction. And so finally this guy read it, and he wrote one short story, which was published in the Atlantic and got in Best American Short Stories. That was his first short story. I think it was Ethan Kanan, you know, and it's like his first short story was like, boom, you
They know
know?
what buttons to hit.
It was just another market.
A surprising amount of people who want to write don't in fact read, and this is because I also freelance at it, and then I get those moments of, have you ever read a book? Like if you have read a book, you will have some idea of what structure is, and just simply like things, narrative arc, and how dialogue works. Like I mean, even literally quotation marks, how that works. But again, a surprising amount of people do not do that. So
You know what's useful? Write some fanfic. You know, the people who write fanfic, you know, they're up at 11 in the evening and they're like, you know, God damn it, Harry and Malfoy are getting naked tonight. They're getting naked tonight down in Slytherin. And they're like, and they're writing away and stuff like that, and you know, you know, but the thing is, they're doing it out of love.
Yeah.
And what they're writing, well, maybe not, maybe more lost, something. But you know, they're writing their slash fiction and stuff, and you're like, oh, that's really, you're like, what a pointless, wasted. Actually, they're doing something out of love, out of passion, and internalizing some basics about what other people want to read. They're writing something because there's a whole group of people who have been waiting on that Harry Malfoy first kiss, you know, and you're giving it to them, and you're doing it in language that you picked up from J.K. Rowling, and then you're like, wow, you know, if only I changed the characters' names a little bit, made them vampires, maybe I could do something people, or made them like, you know, like maybe made Malfoy like a, you know, I call him Gray, and he has like a business or something, Gray's rich, you know, and I mean, like that's valuable. These are people who loved one specific kind of fiction and learned some fundamentals from it and were able to apply it in stories of their own.
And more to the point, they understood the love that we have for the characters. That is immense. Fan fiction is a celebration of the characters and our affection for them. And I think a lot of times we focus so much on plotting and pacing and this and that we forget characters are what drive story, and characters are what drive us to stories.
well, you guys have asked for it because I'm totally sending you my E.L. James Dr. Seuss mashup. I'm not joking. I did that.
Should you send that? We're doing a dramatic presentation of it.
Next week on. I got to blither on this for a second more, because here's the thing, like, okay, like the fireman is Harry Potter fanfic. Like, it really is. It doesn't seem like it, but right under the surface of the fireman, the scaffolding, the narrative scaffolding of that book is identical to 6 of 7 Harry Potter novels. I don't think other people see it, but I definitely see it. My first novel, Heart-Shaped Box, is John Carpenter fanfic. You know, Judas Coin was supposed to be Kurt Russell, circa about 1983, with the beard from The Thing. You know, it was basically McCready. And the whole thing is structured like one of those John Carpenter films from like the Halloween Thing, Assault on Precinct 13, you know, era of Carpenter's career. And I mean, I do think that a lot of writers, especially when they get stoked and they're doing something they're really, you know, pumped up about, are sort of riffing off what they love. You know, people make fun of, you know, E.L. Gray for, you know, for doing like E.L. James, E.L. Gray, yeah, right, James.
Dick Cheney.
You know, they Dick Cheney, right? People are outraged about Dick Cheney's 50 Shades of Grey. Can you imagine how fucked up that would be? That would be like the most fucked up. Like, I never want to read like Dick Cheney 50 Shades of Grey fanfic. Is like, but like, you know.
I understand there is now an entire chapter unfolding in my head.
But
never gonna sleep again.
But you know,
Mental world.
what she did off Twilight is not all that different from what Michael Chabon did off of, you know, Superman and Captain America.
Fafford and Great Mouse.
You know, right? Yeah, absolutely. You know, writers are inspired. They, you know, to write because they loved something, and inevitably, much of what they write is a reflection on what they loved.
So let's get back to the audience. We've got oh yeah, was there a hand?
I was just going to mention something about teaching. I mean, I think teaching or writing can perhaps learn something from teaching of visual arts, where you actually, what you try to do is create circumstances where you get to do things that are outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
So you get people to draw something that would, you know, when you do a figure study, they put a naked person in front of you and force you to look at it as just a collection of shapes, and how you can then represent that and put that on paper. Go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right, but that's, I mean, that's when you give them exercises.
Right.
But which is slightly different from a classroom teaching. That's letting them do it.
Well, you do, but I mean, what you can do is use that as a setup for them to then take it somewhere else. I mean, the one time I taught writing, I brought a very old lamp, like this old beat up lamp, and had to just spend a page describing that lamp. Because these kids were just basically just trying to pass things off and not really observing things. And that was, found to be very helpful for just that aspect of the craft.
Yeah.
One of the things I love to do when I do teach is I'll give them something, my favorite one is I need an opening paragraph in which you introduce the protagonist, the antagonist, and the narrator, and they have to be 3 different voices. And then I give them 15 minutes to go and play with it. And actually that's, because I always do the exercises with them, and that's how the first story, The Devil's West, came out of an exercise. But yeah, something like that where you're giving them something to work with, the hands-on stuff. But I guess I differentiate teaching as in, received wisdom, wisdom received kind of thing back and forth, the lecturing. I don't think that works.
No.
Yeah.
Other questions for our panelists?
We could question you.
Yeah. What are your most embarrassing moments? Oh, wait.
What do people reread?
Oh, that's a good one. What do people reread? Mark?
I have so many books that I want to read. I have hundreds of books on my to-be-read list that I don't have time to reread anymore. I need an excuse to reread something. And in fact, when I was doing one of my teaching writing courses, it was on teaching genre fiction, and I turned up on the first day, and I had about 10 students, 12 students, and I said to them, "So, what do we understand about genre fiction?" And they all looked completely blank. So I started talking about crime and horror and things like that, and I could see their faces falling, and they were saying, "Oh, I don't like that stuff. I don't like that stuff." And I said to them, "So, why are you here?" And they said, "Well, because it's a writing course. I didn't know what that other word meant." But it did give me an excuse. It's a book that Joe may have heard of. I taught The Shining. And it was a great excuse to reread The Shining. I hadn't read it for 20-25 years, and it was really interesting to actually be able to break it down as well, and to teach it to these students, to these 10-12 students who didn't like horror, and they ranged in age from 16, 17 right up to kind of pensioner age. They were sort of pensioners writing stories about their time in the war and their cat and things like that. And every single one of them really liked the book. I was really surprised. Every one of them loved the book, and so many of them expressed surprise afterwards and were saying, "Actually, this stuff's really good. This is like proper writing and everything."
Yeah, I tend not to reread a lot of stuff. There's always way more than I actually have time to read. Also, I think the years as an editor, having to reread books 4 or 5 times before it sees publication, I don't want to do that anymore if I don't have to. I do reread a lot of fan fiction because that is where I rest my brain. There are a couple of writers who I know that it's going to take me away out of everything for half an hour or whatever, and I will go back and reread those. My comfort read when I'm feeling crappy, though, is Dorothy L. Sayers. Yeah. I have the Lord Peter Omnibus, huge, massive hardcover, and when I'm feeling crappy, I have chronic illness, when I can't do anything else, I just take that hardcover, and it's me, the sofa, and the book for the rest of the afternoon. I must have reread those 3 novels 30 times each by now.
Yeah, same. When I'm down, it's Penthouse Letters, Volume 3. Always lifts my spirits. As far as teaching The Shining, I don't talk about my dad all that much, when I'm on stage, but I do have to say, as a minor point of family pride, my brother went to graduate school in Columbia and went into one class, and the teacher in the class, lecture hall, 75 people, and the teacher in the front of the class said, "We're going to talk about real writing, so if you came here to learn how to write like Stephen King, the door is there," and my brother got up and walked out. And probably the book that I've read the most is The Dead Zone. I've read The Dead Zone probably 20 plus times, and you know, still feel like I'm decoding it in some ways. House with a Clock on Its Walls by John Bellairs. I've read over and over again. The Harry Potter stories. I've read quite a bit.
Do you do the Lord of the Rings, Narnia?
A Hobbit.
Yeah, I mean, intellectually, I know that Lord of the Rings is far, far superior to the Harry Potter novels, but emotionally, I like those characters in the Harry Potter stories better. Sorry, guys. I feel like that's kind of like saying, I really think that Oasis blows the Beatles out of the water. And, what can I say? What can I say? I mean, Harry and Ron and Hermione, I have this huge emotional attachment to them that I just don't have for Merry and Pippin.
Yeah, I have just actually remembered that when I was a kid, I read Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators.
Oh, I love that.
But I didn't read all of them. I can't remember which ones I read. There are a few that kind of stick in my mind. So I've decided that I'm going to read them all. And I actually started this a few years ago, and I read 3 a year now.
Hey,
so I'm just kind of working my way through them.
How far in are you?
I'm to about 21, something like that.
Shit. If you were just starting, I'd be like, let's jump in. I'll read with you. That'd be great. But you're up to 21 now. Fuck.
Yeah, I've been doing it for a few years now.
Question.
I think just there. There's a question a second ago.
Over here.
Oh, right there.
There's
Yeah.
some.
Joe, I'll read Three Investigators with you again. I'll join in on that one.
It's well worth the
Those were some of my
journey.
favorite. It's a book club. Yeah, those were some of my favorites growing up.
I think one of the first books that I ever was really attached to was Alfred Hitchcock's Spellbinders, and it had a whole collection of these classic little thrillers, including The Most Dangerous Game.
Yes.
And The Most Dangerous Game that one really grabbed me, really seized my attention. And of course, I just love the Three Investigators, and I've always wanted to live in that capsule under the pile of junk that they had. That just seemed so cool. Yeah.
The Ultimate Clubhouse.
I have to recommend a book to you guys because almost no one has ever heard of this, and we used it as a text when I was in, I think, the 8th grade. It's called Spacesuits and Gumshoes. Has anyone ever seen this anthology? It's the first half is all science fiction stories, and the second half is all mystery stories, and it's full of people like John D. MacDonald and Ross MacDonald, and Ray Bradbury's All Summer in a Day is in the first half.
Wait,
of
what's
that.
it called?
Spacesuits and Gumshoes. And I thought I had hallucinated this book, and I just made this up whole cloth until I was at a library sale and actually found the book for $1, and I'm like, it exists! I was so excited, and so you should all get that book. So that's my recommendation.
Did we do favorite book?
No, I don't. Let's do favorite book. Mark?
And favorite movie?
Yeah.
Can we do favorite book and favorite movie?
We've got 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Okay, favourite book. The one that leaps straight into my head is the Donna Tartt book, The Secret History.
Whoa.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the one that jumps into my head. So, favourite movie, I'll pass on that one for now and think about. No, probably Psycho actually. Psycho.
Okay.
My favorite book is Peter Beagle's Fine and Private Place. I think it has some of the most beautiful language and one of the best understandings of romantic and non-romantic love ever. It's just an absolutely gorgeous book, and it's one of those ones I won't reread the entire book, but I'll pick it up and just reread passages, specific passages from my mood. Favorite movie? Rear Window.
We got 2 Hitchcocks.
Favorite movie is Jaws, which I watch about once every 6 months.
That's
Yeah.
a fair second choice.
Yeah, it's my favorite film. It's also the best film ever made. Don't give me this Godfather, Citizen Kane crap.
Not
Just
Jaws 2 or 3 or 4.
Jaws 2 is the second best shark movie ever made. It's a big drop off from Jaws. This is kind of like when we invaded Iraq and we heard Saddam had the 4th biggest army on the planet. It turns out there's a big fucking drop off after 3. So there's a big drop off, but Jaws 2 is the best. And I guess best book, Penthouse Letters Volume 3. Movie.
As long as you're doing best, what's the worst book you ever read?
Oh, probably.
No, but for a shoe.
Probably Mark Morris's. No, I'm sorry. Worst book I ever read. I read a book called Now Let Us Pray, P-R-E-Y. Like, and it was this weird survivalist, like right-wing, jack-off fantasy about like, sort of taking out all the liberals. That's B-R-U-L-L-S, liberals. In like these weird series of terrorist acts and stuff, and very encouraging about terrorist acts, right-wing terrorism. Really weird, scheming paperback, really nasty. That was like back in the 90s. That was, I don't know where that came from. I don't know why I read it.
I read some really, really terrible horror novels in the 70s and 80s that I just can't, I actually can't remember their titles or anything, but most of them were published by Zebra Books or Zebra Books.
Oh yeah.
But I've got to tell you the story that I've told a few people this weekend, that there's a British horror writer called Guyan Smith. Yeah, the Crabs. But Guyan Smith wrote a book called The Sucking Pit, and I was once on a panel with Kim Newman, and we were talking about The Sucking Pit, and Kim Newman said, "That's the only book I've ever read whose title rhymes with my opinion of it."
Yeah, I mean, oh god, bad books. I mean, just pick up any cheesy catalog. Bad. But as far as Kim Newman goes, Neil Gaiman and Kim Newman, Neil's first book is not the Duran Duran biography for which he is most famous. That was the pinnacle of his career. That was Neil's best. But before Duran Duran, with the Duran Duran bio, he did Awful Beyond Belief. Ghastly Beyond Belief with Kim Newman, which is just, the whole thing is just quotes from the worst science fiction, horror, and fantasy novels ever written. And it's the only book, it was passed around the King family table at dinner time and reduced us all to sobs. I mean, like gripping the table like no one could speak. We just, and I wound up buying it online for like $150. And I kept it in a pride of place in the house above the toilet because it was like sort of the perfect proper reading. Which brings me to a question for you guys. After a book falls in the toilet, how long until it's okay to read it? I'm asking for a friend.
Was there something in the toilet when it fell in?
Well, but the thing is there have been things in the toilet in the past. I don't think there's any doubt that the toilet has You know the answer?
Yeah, it's Lysol. Every page, just keep it
until
wet,
it dries,
and then nothing can get through.
Ooh, what an interesting idea. You just saved him $150.
The answer to worst book ever is I used to read The Slush Pile.
Yes.
My therapist made a lot of money off of that. I have read the worst book ever written multiple times, sometimes in crayon. Yeah, there's nothing that's actually published that can match that trauma.
Although some have tried.
It is now actually 2:30, so we have come to an end. Sorry if we didn't get to everyone's questions. Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Give it up for our guests of honor.
I hope you enjoyed tonight's Necon show from Bristol, Rhode Island. Joe Hill, Mark Morris, Laura Anne Gilman, we want to thank all of you for allowing us to film your panel. We also want to thank Mac Bechtel and Sarah Booth for putting on the program and letting us film it. And the moderators, Sandra Castori and Brett Savory, who I think did an excellent job. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully we'll see you again in the future when we're back in the studio with Phil Perrone and Sydney Lee.